Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Sugata Mitra on the End of Knowing. If you have any questions for Sugata, please send them through the Zoom chat function. Please send them when you think of them, and we'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the meeting. So please use the chat function, not the QA function. Send them when you think of them, and we'll curate them and ask as many as we can at the end of the meeting. Next slide, please. And just next slide, please.
My slides don't seem to be moving. Let's see. Okay. There we go.
Terrific. Thank you, Sugata. Upcoming webinars. October 7th, Trish Hatch, Data-Driven School Counseling and a Multi-Tiered System of Support. October 21st, Jessica Jabrian Hannigan and John E. Hannigan, Building Behavior, How to Select and Implement Behavior Initiatives. And October 28th, Joanne Quinn and Michael Fullon, What's Deep About Deep Learning? Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Ariel Curry, Acquisitions Editor at Corwin, to introduce today's presenter.
Thanks so much, Jeff. So Sugata Mitra is a researcher and physicist, and he has recently retired as a professor at Newcastle University in the UK. You probably know him from the Hole in the Wall experiment, which inspired 3 TED Talks, as well as the movie Slumdog Millionaire. He is the winner of the very first ever TED $1 Million Prize for Research, which funded his newest round of experiments, The School in the Cloud, which he'll be talking about today in this webinar, and which is the subject of his new book, also called The School in the Cloud. And that just hit bookshelves this last couple weeks. So today we'll actually be raffling off a copy at the end of this webinar. So you have to stick around till the end, and I hope you do because it's going to be a wonderful presentation. And so now it's my pleasure to hand it over to Sugata Mitra.
Thanks, Ariel. I welcome wherever you are and whatever time you're in. I'm speaking right now from San Jose, California in the United States. And it's 3:33 in the afternoon. So, a webinar, unlike a lecture or a talk, is a bit different because I can imagine you sitting somewhere, looking at a screen on some kind of a device, looking at the slides and listening to me. In a way, it's a way to get from my mind into yours, which is different from if I was standing in front of you. It's different from if you were watching a movie clip of me speaking. And in fact, it's also different from if you were reading something that I wrote. It's different from all of those. I don't think we've had anything like a webinar ever until in the last few years when the internet made it possible. And in fact, what I have to say has a lot to do about the internet and about knowing things. I mean, what is it that we mean when we say we know something? It's quite hard to define. Well, let me give you a more simple example. Let's take something like a headache. Now, everybody can have a headache. Everybody, I guess, has a headache once in a while. So I could ask you, where is your headache? And you would say, well, no, that's not a good question. I mean, the headache's not where. I mean, it's there somewhere inside my head. And then I could ask you, well, can you see it? And you say, oh, no, you can't actually see a headache. You can only feel it. Um, uh, and then I would say, can I feel your headache? And you'd say, no, 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 you can't feel my headache. You can have your own. Uh, you know, a headache's not a tangible thing, but everybody knows it exists and you can have one. Now think of the internet. Lots and lots of computers connected to each other. Lots and lots of computers connected not only to each other, but to minds. If you can see that first slide on the screen, I tried to make a picture of it, you know. I mean, there's you in the background somewhere far away, and there's the network all over you. And I could ask you the same questions. I could say, does the internet exist? And you would say, of course it does. And then I could say, well, where is it? And you would say, oh, that's not a good question. I mean, it's not anywhere. It's sort of there, but it's not anywhere. Then I could say, can you see it? And you would say, no, you can't see it, but you can be in it. And then I can say, can the two of us be in it at the same time? And of course you would say, yes, yes, we can. And then, can I tell you things that you don't know on the internet? And will you pick up what I'm telling you? And the answer is yes. So I could then think of, what does it mean to know something? Is it possible that I know something and I can transfer this to you, this knowing to you, over some sort of a medium? I could speak, I could look at you, I could, you know, do a video, or I could go on the internet. Are there other ways to know things? Well, to know the things that I know, you don't actually have to have me around. Everybody knows that now. What does that mean? You can know what I know by searching on the internet, even if I'm not there, even if I've not been there for a very long time. You can know what Socrates said 2,500 years ago by going on the internet. Do you have to then know everything there is on the internet? Well, everybody knows that's not possible. So I thought of a title to this conversation, which you can see on the screen. It's called The End of Knowing. And you know what? A lot of people don't like that title. Somebody in England recently called it delusional. Now, I don't even know what delusional means. But anyway, I know this much, that it doesn't mean anything nice. Well, but we are going to talk about the end of knowing. We're not going to talk about the end of knowledge, okay? A lot of people seem to think that that's what I mean. No, that's not what I mean at all. I don't mean the end of knowledge. I mean the end of knowing. But let's go into that story a bit more. I got to all this over almost 20 years of time, actually a little more than 20 years of time, through small experiments that I did, well, all over the world, really. And each of those experiments gave us a clue. You know, like in a detective novel, a clue pointing to something else. I'm going to take you over those clues. And the first of those clues, the oldest of the lot, was an experiment called the hole in the wall. It was a very simple experiment. The year was 1999, and there were children and people all over the world who had not seen a computer, you know, never seen a computer. Some had not even heard of one. And of course, very few had heard of the internet or even knew what it is. The experiment in 1999 was to see what would happen if I took a computer and I just put it outdoors somewhere. you know, in my case, I stuck it into a wall, as you can see in that slide. And if I just turned it on and left it there, what would happen? Well, as you might expect, the first thing that happens if the computer is a little low on the ground, it's a few feet, 3 or 4 feet, a meter off the ground, children come there because they can see what's on the screen and they're curious. And then if there's nobody around, they start touching it. And then they figure out that if you touch the touchpad or if you touch the mouse, then things move on the screen. And then they learn about how to click. And then they sort of begin to wonder about what this all is. Well, in the actual experiment of 1999, what we found was that in about a few weeks' time, they start doing a lot of things on the internet that many of us know how to do. And in those days, the question was, who taught them? Because for most of grown-up people who could use the internet in 1999, we had all been taught how to use it. Well, believe it or not, I know there are many of you out there who would be thinking, what? Taught how to use a computer? Whoever teaches anybody how to use a computer? Well, they used to. And teaching people about how to use a computer actually stopped because of this experiment called the hole in the wall. When we found that children in groups can actually learn how to use the computer on their own. On their own? Nobody liked that back in 1999. Many don't even today. What do you mean learn things on their own? In order to learn things, you have to be taught. Who is teaching the children? I couldn't answer that question. I used to stand there, from morning till night, looking at the children, messing with the computer, and doing all kinds of things that they shouldn't really be able to do. And I thought, in my mind, well, no one seems to be teaching them, but they seem to be learning. And that's a very important observation. Learning doesn't necessarily have to be coupled with teaching. You can learn things without being taught. And indeed, you can be taught things, but not learn anything. As I was thinking about this stuff, I started to do more of these experiments. I got a bit of funding from the World Bank because they were interested. They were interested because there are many children in the world who have no teachers. And people get disappointed thinking, what's going to happen to all these children? The World Bank was interested in a method where perhaps, just perhaps, without a teacher, children might learn. I repeated the hole in the wall experiment many times over, many different places, all over India, Cambodia, South Africa, and many other people did as well. And they all got the same results. Let me show you some clips out of those times. Okay, taken with an old 20-year-old camera, so don't worry about the quality, but you'll get a feel of what used to happen at those places called the hole in the wall. Well, just looking on, we couldn't quite figure out what was going on. You could see the children milling around from here to there. You could hear them talking a lot. You could see some of them staring into the computer, and you could see some of them staring the other way about. But everybody seems to have learned something or the other. And I couldn't quite figure out how. But we did understand one thing. After about 3 years of those experiments, we understood that children can learn to use the internet by themselves. Now, you're going to say big deal because everybody knows that. You know that a 3-year-old can learn how to use an iPad by himself or herself. But remember, they didn't know that 20 years ago. And I also learned something else, which is at the bottom of the screen, that children learn to use the internet by themselves if they're unsupervised, if they're in groups, and if they're accessing the internet on screens that other people can see. In other words, large visible screens in a safe and public space. I didn't know at that time why these things were important, but I knew they were because if you removed any of these, if you tried supervising them, if you tried to make them make groups, if you gave them tiny little devices, then things didn't work the same way. And I didn't know why. So our first clue was that children can learn how to use the internet. I brought those results over to England in around 2006 and brought this whole method into the classroom. How do you bring the hole in the wall into the classroom? Well, it's very simple, really. Just take a classroom, put a few computers in it, hopefully with big screens, you know, at least laptops and desktops, not little tablets. Bring only a few computers. So if there are 20 children, bring only 5. So what happens? Well, the children start making groups. What else can they do? And when they do that, you can ask them a question which you're absolutely sure they don't know the answer to, and also a question that you sometimes feel they should not be able to figure out an answer to. And what would happen with children clustered around the internet is that they would learn these impossible things. We call this a self-organized learning environment, or a SOLE, S-O-L-E. And teachers in England tried it and they liked it. They liked it because they didn't have to do anything much. Set up the SOLE, put a few computers in the classroom, tell the children they can use the internet, ask them a nice, interesting question, and sit back and watch the magic happen. SOLE started to spread all over.
Controls the left part. The left part of the brain controls the right.
How the iPod and iPad can figure out where you are in the world.
Was Paul Cézanne. Cézanne was his second name and Paul was his first name. These paintings, he made them three-dimensional, so that was achieved by the front being lighter than the back of the painting, so that showed three-dimensional.
Let's just look at this question one more time and read what it says. Sit on your bottoms. It says, how does the physical and climatic environment we have in Australia affect the way
Well, widely, but by far the largest part of Australia is
Dos maiores estudiosos modernos, Sigmund Freud, os sonhos são...
Sigmund Freud, the dreams are...
So, you know, I tried these SOLEs all over the world, and I made the questions harder and harder. The last bit you saw was somewhere in Latin America. The question I had asked the children, who were all like 9 years old, was, why do we dream? And they got to work on it. They worked for about 30 or 40 minutes. Then they came and they started talking about dreams. Some said, dreams are about what happened the day before. Some said dreams are about what you want should happen later in the future. And finally, this one little girl that you see on your screen said, we don't have to guess. There was a man called Sigmund Freud. And at that point I said, hey, our time's up. Let's not go into that, shall we? And we stopped. So souls were fun. And they spread all through the world really quickly and landed itself in just about every continent on the planet. We found out something very strange. Children in self-organized learning environments can learn anything by themselves. Anything? I know you're going to sit up there and you're going to say, what do you mean by anything? I mean, have you tried everything? Well, no, of course I haven't tried everything. But I've tried the hardest questions that I could. And I've never had a group of children who've been on the internet and come back to me and said, we could not find anything. I think you'll appreciate that the internet is too big for anyone to say, I couldn't find anything, if you know what to look for, if you know how to look for it. And of course, I found all through that they have to be in unsupervised heterogeneous groups accessing the internet on large visible screens. By now, the teachers were beginning to get a little annoyed with those 3 sentences at the bottom of your screen. What do you mean unsupervised? Aren't we required? Well, I wasn't saying you're not required. I was just saying that you need to raise the questions. You don't need to raise the answers, because the answers are all out there. You can know when you want to know. It was, in my mind, the first glimpse of the sentence, the end of knowing. Well, with those 2 clues, I started to work on where this method can go. Can I make it better? And I realized that even if children don't have someone who can raise a good question, you could use the internet to get people over on video conferencing, just the way we're talking now, to actually raise the question for them from anywhere on the internet. I asked for volunteers, and I got many. I got people who would, volunteer from Africa to talk to children in China. I would get people from Iceland who would volunteer to talk to children in Africa. It was amazing. And they didn't teach. We called them the granny cloud. They simply have a conversation. The children listen, and then the children do what they want to do. And then they tell the granny what they found. I called it the method of the grandmother, not because you need a grandmother to do it. It doesn't have to be old, it doesn't have to be a woman, it doesn't have to be a grandparent. It can be anyone who is interested in children. You talk to children, you raise a question, you let them get onto the internet, and they come back to you with surprises. Here's a glimpse of the first few years.
As fast as you can. You can't catch me. You say it. You can't catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. Well done. Very good. So again.
So that was a conversation way back in, I think, 2010 from my office in Newcastle to children in the city of Hyderabad in India. And we noticed something very interesting. The children's English accents would change, as you might expect, except that it would change in a matter of minutes, not hours, not days. Because after all, they simply emulate or copy the accent of the person they're hearing. They want to talk to her because she's saying something interesting. And that interest causes knowing. That interest causes learning. So the presence, digital or physical, of an admiring and encouraging adult helps the process of self-organized learning. And I'm going to repeat myself over and over and over again with those last three lines. If they are in unsupervised, heterogeneous groups accessing the internet through large visible screens in a safe and public space. We have to make the internet that way if we want the internet to do good things for our children. So in 2013, I got this big prize called the TED Prize, and I used that money to set up a pretty big experiment to build 7 laboratories. 7 laboratories where we would put 2 ideas together. The idea of a soul, the self-organized learning environment, and the idea of the granny cloud, of a remote mediator. And then over a 3-year period, we would see what happens. I built 7 of these, ranging all the way from the remotest areas I could find in India, into urban India, and finally into urban middle-class Britain. And we studied the children for 3 years. Here's a look at some of those places. We called these places the school in the cloud. So a school in the cloud is not a website. You know, many people think I'm talking about a web learning space. No, it isn't. It's a physical space where children come, like a school, except that it's a school that's immersed in the internet. Well, here's one of the remotest places that I found and built a school in the cloud in. It's in an area called the Sundarbans in Bengal, India. This is where the Ganges River meets the Bay of Bengal and forms one of the largest river deltas in the world. It's really wild, that place. It has no electricity, there's no healthcare, there's no schooling, there's almost no schooling. They have very little. I built a school in the cloud there. It has 6 computers inside it. It has an internet connection with a 3G antenna, and it's solar powered. We studied it for 3 years. Another one in India, a village called Chandrakona. In semi-urban India, Western India, a town called Faltan in Maharashtra, in the state of Maharashtra in India. A school in the cloud in a village called Sidhuwal in the Punjab. This was actually quite recently. But you can see from that how simple it is to build a school in the cloud. Just a few computers, comfortable seating, reconfigurable seating, which means sitting on the floor in this case, nice colorful walls, and stay away from the children. That's all. Here's one of the schools in the cloud, one of the most successful ones in the town of Killingworth in northeastern England. It's called the George Stephenson High School, and it's located inside the school. And then one of my colleague and student constructed one of them in Harlem. I think it was the first of its kind in the United States. The same structure as everywhere else. The same 3 lines, heterogeneous groups, unsupervised in the presence of the internet. And I was able to show that it worked exactly the same way as it did everywhere else. Finally, we got a model in a little village in Bengal, India, called Daskara. I have the design now. It costs about, $4,000 or $5,000 to build one up from the ground upwards in the playground of an existing school. It's a good idea to build it in an existing school because they're easy to maintain. A school has security, it has electricity, it has internet, it has people to look after the children. It's a lot easier to keep it going than in the middle of nowhere. We call it the Dasghara model. That's what it looks like inside. It's really a tiny little space. It can take about 20 children, maybe 24, and it has 6 computers in it. In there, actually in England, a child of 12 once said to me something that stuck in my mind. I asked him, "Do you like learning from the internet?" And he said, "Yes, we enjoy it very much." And I said, "So what's so special about the internet?" And he said, "On the internet, you know before you learn." It stuck in my mind for a long time, that sentence. And in that sentence is the essence of the end of knowing. So finally, here were the results from those years of experiments. On the bottom left-hand side of your screen are the results from the hole in the wall. That straight, that line, slanted line going upwards. What it's trying to tell us is that you can take any digital device and you can give it to a group of children and they'll figure out how to use it. You don't need to teach them how to use it. The graph in the middle of the screen shows the improvement in internet searching skills. Very important skill for our children today. How to search the internet, how to look for what you want, how to make sure what you're looking at is okay, how to make sure what's fake and what's not, how to stay safe. You don't need to teach them. In a self-organized learning environment, they learn how to do all these things by themselves. The third graph on the top right-hand corner of the screen, that shows an interesting and perhaps surprising result when you first think about it. There was this steady improvement in reading comprehension in all the places that I experimented in. Why? Well, it's actually very simple. When children explore the internet doesn't know that they're children, not in the school in the cloud or hole in the wall environment. So the internet throws everything it has at them. The children don't know what they're supposed to be able to read and what they're not supposed to be able to read. So they read everything. Result, reading comprehension goes quickly upwards. Teachers love that because everybody knows that reading comprehension is the heart of knowing. So schools in the cloud will do these 4 things: improve reading comprehension, produce rapid searching skills, cause learning with good retention, improve communication and collaboration. Obviously, they're working together. And when teachers use this, they tell me that they change. They learn how to step back. And they now know how important it is in this 21st century to be able to do that, to be able to step back. I tell them this is what we ought to be doing. When we let our children into the internet, we ought to be saying to them, "You go there, I will go with you." Because you don't really know what's there up on the internet. You're no longer the repository of knowledge that you will impart to the children. They'll figure things out on their own in the future that they're heading towards. All you can do is to ask them the right questions and then go with them as they look for the answers. But now let's look at a bit of the bad news in all this. Assessment systems, the exam or the test. You sit alone, you have paper and pencil, you're not supposed to use any assistive device. and you're supposed to give answers out of your head. Why? You could ask that question. Why? Why do I need to be tested that way? So that we can figure out how much you know. But why don't you give me my phone back? Oh, you and your phone together know a lot of things, but how much do you know without it? Is it important? I don't know, you ask yourself. Look at the picture on the right. That's the picture of an office in the early 20th century. It's full of people working with paper and pencil, writing by hand, and doing arithmetic in their heads. Why? Because there was no other way. So should we still prepare our children for that kind of an office? But those offices don't exist anymore. Do you want to prepare your children for employers who are dead? I think not. You do want to prepare your children for the kind of offices they'll go into. And I'm sure that of the people who are listening to all this, well, all of you, almost all of you, would be in an office like the one on the right. To prepare the children for that kind of an office, don't you think the learning environment should be like the one on the left? The school in the cloud can prepare your children for the world that is coming. It's the best I can get at. Maybe there'll be other ways, but at the moment, let them go there on their own. Assessment needs to change. In a test, you ask people things that you know the answer to, and then check if they also know the answer to it. Why these questions? Well, just in case if they ever need that information. But if they need that information, they can just look it up in seconds today. They could not have done that 30 or 40 years ago. So you needed a test like the one on the left-hand side of your screen. You don't need that kind of test. You need a test for being able to answer questions just in time. And that's what I've tried to show on the right-hand side. So you need to change learning itself from stuff that you may need just in case to things that are important, to questions that you want the answers to, and a method to find those answers just in time. So basically, what I'm trying to say when I titled this lecture, The End of Knowing, is that we need to prepare children to learn just in time instead of just in case in today's world. In a world where what we need to know is no longer quite evident. Do you know what your child will need 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you know where your child will live? Do you know with what? If you have a child who's 5 years old, there is a good probability that by the time he's 40 or she is 40, she may be living on Mars. In what way will you prepare that child? Will you still teach her stuff just in case? Or will you show her how to solve a problem when she sees it? So I'm proposing that we do 4 things. Introduce the internet as a formal subject in school, like physics or chemistry or whatever. You can't live in a world where we use the internet 24/7 without knowing how it works. You know, many of us know how a steam engine works, but we don't know how a server works. That's not on. We need to introduce complex dynamical systems as a subject. You know, complex dynamical systems are things which are connected to each other, big networks. We need to teach that as a subject. That's the new physics. How do connected systems behave? We need to divide up the curriculum into three parts. A part that is necessary for life, a part that feels good to know, things that are just good to know. And unfortunately, before the system changes, a part that is only for examinations. And finally, I say this over and over again, we need to allow the use of the internet during examinations. Because you don't need to know how to tell the time without looking at a watch. And I'm going to leave you with that. I hope it all made sense. Much of what I said is here in this book that's already in the market in the United States, will be in the market in Europe and India and Asia by the end of the year. And there's a documentary, a lovely one by Jerry Rothwell, also called The School in the Cloud. I think you can get a look at it on Vimeo. And maybe after doing all that, you'll just sit back and think. And maybe you'll think about the future of learning. Well, that's all what I had to say. If you have questions, let's now see how a webinar deals with questions.
Hi, Sugata. It's Jeff again. I have some questions for you that came in.
Okay.
Here's one. How were internet search skills assessed, particularly reliability of sources? And how was learning retention assessed with the students?
Okay. I'll take the second one first because that's easier. How is learning retention tested? Well, obviously, you test on day one, and then you test on 3 months later or 3 years later or whatever it is, and check for if you're getting the same or similar answers. It's not the only way to check for learning retention, but it's the easiest way. And make it casual. It's not like you have to make a difficult exam. You just go up to some children and say, hey, do you remember what we did in year 4, 3 years ago? Do you remember we did something about cyberspace? And see if the children say, oh yeah, I remember I found out this and he found out that or whatever. So that's for retention. In terms of, how do you assess their use of the internet? Well, that's a little more difficult. It's much more subjective, but you can do it. The way I devised the test was to make up questions which were categorized into 6 levels. The first level are entirely factual. Something like, so what's the time now in New York? And then you collect answers and, children will take a few minutes and they'll answer the question. If there's somebody who can't, then you know that there's a very fundamental piece that's missing and you would take action accordingly. Level 2 kind of question would be, so why is the time in New York different from the time in Tokyo? And you can make a funny story about it. You could say, so is the time across the street different from the time over here where I'm standing? And the children would say, no, it's the same time. So is it different in the next city? No, it's the same time. So why is it different in a faraway place? Now they're going to look for stuff. And you're going to look for how long they took and how accurately they got to the fact that the rotation of the Earth on its axis and around the sun is what makes the time different in different places. I have done this experiment. For 9-year-olds, they'll get to an answer in less than 15 minutes. So that's your level 2 kind of a question. Then you go to the level 3 kind of question, which might be, what are the ways we measure time with? Now that's a more conceptual question. It doesn't have a single answer. And you watch for where and how the children find those answers. Level 4 is where you begin to get to questions that may not have an answer as well. A question like, why is the sun there at all? Now, I think these are very valuable questions for children. What should a teacher do? Well, as I said, all you can do is to say, look, I don't know the answer, but you go there and I'll come with you. In the process, you can also see how much they get into stuff which is incorrect. But I can give you a bit of good news here. If you do a soul correctly, that is, if you have groups of children, 4 or 5 children, and if you have 4 or 5 such groups working together, the entire self-organized learning environment is a self-correcting environment. There are children who can go astray into a wrong path, and there are other children who will pull them back saying, that website's no good. I've seen a group of little girls in China looking up something and watching a YouTube video and turning it off in about 10 seconds saying, that guy is talking nonsense. They were only 8 years old, those girls. I looked at that and I thought, well, there is hope then. So try it yourself and see, but I think you'll find the same thing that I did. That children can detect incorrect stuff on the internet if they're in groups, if they're unsupervised, and if they have free access to the internet. The danger is in single children alone with the internet. Don't do that. It's harmful.
Thank you very much. I have another question for you. How could we apply your findings within current public school constraints, as in compulsory standards, assessments, etc.? What's the best way to apply your findings within the public school domain?
Well, you got to a good question. It's the kind of question that makes me want to pull my hair out with my bare hands. But I know what you mean. But does it mean that we cannot use the kind of system I'm talking about? Well, the school teachers in England showed me how to do it. You stay within the system. So what do you have? You have a curriculum, you have a fixed amount of time to teach it in, and you're under pressure. You have standardized tests that the children must perform well in. How do you use a soul? Well, here is one way that teachers propose. They start a topic with a soul. For example, let's say that what you're planning to teach is weather change. Is weather change or climate change important for the planet? Well, you could start with the soul. You could start with that soul by saying, you know, I have often wondered what the difference is between the words climate and weather. And let the children go. What teachers claim is that sometimes you will find that 70% or more of what you were going to teach actually gets learned by the children in a very quick span of time. There are holes in their learning. You examine that and then you fill those in. It's a different way of teaching. You don't have to start from level 0 and then build up to level 100. You let them go up the levels as quickly as they can, as far as they can. And then you fill in the missing levels and you fill in the top. It's one way. You have to evolve your own way. Some other teachers will ask the children, today I was going to teach you about volcanoes. And in one school in England, the children said, okay, shall we soul it first? And that teacher said, you know, I felt so good. I said, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it. And they did more than half of what I would have taught in 40 minutes time. So yes, you can mesh it in. The system doesn't recognize it. And the system still doesn't quite believe it. So my advice to you teachers, if you want to have fun, if you want to explore, if you're really concerned about your children, Use the self-organized learning environments and keep it quiet. Okay.
Terrific. I have one more question for you. How did you prepare the remote mediators to engage the children and then get out of the way? And could the same preparation be used to teach teachers in the classroom how to get out of the way as well?
Yeah, yes, it is. There are several ways to do it. First of all, the Granny Cloud now has a website of their own. It's called grannycloud.org. They have a process by which you become a granny, in quotation marks. They first talk to you, the other grannies talk to you. They assess if you are capable of handling children, if you have the appropriate interest. They ask you to look up my kind of work on the internet, and then they check if you've actually understood. And not only that, most importantly, have you understood and accepted the premise that children should be left alone with their learning? Once they're satisfied, they let you take a couple of sessions supervised, sort of two people logging in at the same time with a group of children. And then finally you go solo. It's a good method. It's been working for more than 10 years now. But it's not the only method. The other way with training of teachers is what I do from school to school whenever I get a chance. I go to a school, I speak to the teachers like I spoke to you for about maybe a half an hour. Then I do a soul with children. And I go there completely unprepared. I ask the teachers to make up a question so that I can confidently tell them, look, I don't know what you are going to make me do. And then I do a soul. It usually goes very well. At the end of that, I ask one of the teachers to do a soul based on a question that I make. And then she gets a feel of it. Usually out of a whole lot of teachers, say out of 20 teachers, about 3 or 4 will start experimenting. And then, if you're lucky, all the teachers will pick it up. There always will be 1 or 2 who will not. They're the ones who don't like the idea of giving up controls. And to be on their side, they're also sometimes extraordinarily good teachers. If you are an exceptionally good teacher, then you know what you're doing. I would leave your methods to you. But demonstration is possibly the best way to learn how to do a soul.
Terrific. Thank you very much. That's the end of our questions. I'd like to now turn our presentation over to Margaret O'Connor, Senior Marketing Manager from Corwin, to discuss some opportunities for you.
Thanks, Jeff. And thank you, Sugata, for your inspiring work and research on self-organized learning and the future of learning. Before we announce our winner of a copy of The School in the Cloud, I just wanted to let everyone know you will be getting a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well as a recording of this webinar. And just a reminder that The School in the Cloud is available on Corwin.com, Sugata's new book, with a 20% discount. And our winner is Victoria Talbot. And Victoria, we will be getting in touch with you via email. So thank you again for everyone for attending tonight. And thank you, Sugata.
Thank you. That was very enjoyable. Thanks a lot.